Okay, welcome back, everybody. So this is the final session of today, which will take the form of a roundtable, which will be moderated by Giora. So I give you the microphone.
Okay, I wanted to start saying, imagine a round table, imagine 5 people sitting around, but there is a round table here, so that's a symbolic one. One of our participants of the round table is here, present. 3 of them are partly virtual. I don't know whether overseas and so on. And the idea was, still is, well, first, we are not the only organization in the field of conservation. Maybe we are the most important, but we are not the only ones. And there are others with different capacities. I assume some of the participants here are in other organizations, but they're also members of ICOMOS. And they were asked to prepare a presentation on the aspect of ICOMOS in a way, the doctrinal papers and so on in their work and in the way their organization refers to these things, and we'll hear them. So the one of them who is here will be the first. Julie, please, floor is yours. Or the table is yours.
I, in any case, wanted to start by thanking the organizational committee for inviting me. It has been a pleasure to listen to all of you today, and also coming from somehow a different perspective also that was really interesting and stimulating. So why I am here today and who I represent, this is also a question I can ask myself, but I wanted to say something. Am I here?
No, I think the mouse.
Yes. Okay.
Now it should.
Everyone. So maybe let me start by explaining why I think I'm here, at least. So first of all, I am an assistant professor in heritage and museum studies. So it means that I study heritage and I teach heritage. So I come from that, let's say, institutional position at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, though I am French and was trained in the French system, which obviously also influenced my way of thinking about certain issues, as we also have heard in the previous presentation. But in that role, I'm also part of an association that is the Association of Critical Heritage Studies that you might know as well. And I will say a few words about the association itself, but more precisely about the guidelines, the main theories, and what does this field of research brings more broadly to the way we think about heritage today. But I would say also last but not least, and I think it's quite important, I am a researcher and I work specifically on the Soviet conception of heritage, on the preservation of built heritage architecture in the Soviet Union and its previous satellite states. And for this reason, I am also involved as a heritage scholar and professional in the preservation of Ukrainian heritage, especially since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It means that I also have different perspective and understanding, and that I do work as well with organizations such as ICOMOS, but in other conflicts, especially the conflicts, the sites and the places where we absolutely need to preserve and to act on heritage very quickly. And so let's say what I will say today might seem somehow contradictory, because I speak a lot about theories and how We should break down all the Western Center big organizations such as ICOMOS. This is how I could start. But I'm also saying that without institution and organizations such as ICOMOS, I would not be able to speak here and to be also proud of the work that we're doing in Ukraine today. So I have these conflicting ideas that I will not try to resolve today, but at least to present. So the Association for Critical Heritage Studies is quite young, especially in confrontation with ICOMOS. It was built at the beginning of 2010. And as it says on its website, it's a network of scholars and researchers working in a broad and interdisciplinary field of critical heritage. So what does this idea of critical means here? It all started with a book, I would say, that you might know, that it might also have been, depending on where you have been trained, somehow your Bible when thinking about heritage. It's the book Uses of Heritage, written by the archaeologist, Australian archaeologist Lauren Smith in 2006, in which basically she absolutely criticized all forms of what she called dominant way of preserving heritage, not only by people inside, let's say, by individuals, but at several levels, including international organization and association, namely also UNESCO, ICOMOS, ICOMOS in also diverse perspective. And so she proposed this very useful concept at that time, saying that the way that heritage, especially built heritage and material heritage, big monuments have been preserved according to an authorized heritage discourse, the famous EHD. And I say the famous because it has been extremely trendy in the field that I'm part of, heritage or critical heritage studies. And so the critical let's say in the name of the association and of the way that we think about heritage comes from that perspective, saying that we need to think the way that we study, but also we produce heritage from a critical perspective, acknowledging, and here I quote then the manifesto of 2012, how nationalism, imperialism, colonialism, cultural elitism, Western triumphalism, class and ethnic exclusion, and the fetishization of expertise have shaped dominant practices both in the research and management of tangible and intangible heritage. So she arrived in 2006 with this idea that then materialized somehow in an association and gathering a lot of scholars, but also of professionals of heritage, saying we need to change things. And with, let's say, somehow a global acknowledgement that something was wrong and that we were heading towards the wrong direction, and that we needed to transform the way that we write about heritage, the way that we conceive heritage, but also the way that practitioners do and then preserve, conserve heritage. And so she, and we talked about that with Claudine, she indeed very much targeted specific groups and really naming them. And that's quite interesting because since that moment, I would say things have changed. Her position of Lawrence and Smith have also shifted from the idea that heritage is all about discourse, is all about the way that we produce heritage by in a performative way of thinking of it. And this is very theoretical, but this is what she says with the idea of heritage discourses. Now she has shifted towards the way that we think we should think about the experience of heritage, the way also people live with it, transform it with their body, with their mind, and more broadly interacting with heritage, both tangible and intangible. And so today, what we do in this field, and then I will come to the way that how I think ICOMOS also could be integrated in the way that we research heritage. We mostly focus on how heritage is made, so recognizing that heritage is socially constructed, by different type of processes around us, and that is not a given. So this is, I would say, this is the basis of people who are doing theories of heritage today. And we're studying the discourses, but also the practices of heritage, acknowledging that it can be, of course, preserved, conserved, restored, but also transformed, destroyed, rehabilitated, etc., etc. And finally, the experience. But the way that the field of research is moving today is quite interesting, and especially with regards to what we have been listening to today. Because one of the first key of critics today is the precise term of conserving, of conservation, both as a word, we conserve. So with this idea that it's still fixed through time, and as a practice, do we still need to conserve things today, especially in the world that we're living in towards, so in the Anthropocene, in the context of climate change and of a broader social injustice worldly? So I wanted to mention maybe two types of direction the field is taking. The first one is thinking about heritage really as something that is not looking towards the past at all, and not anymore, or not only, but also very much about the present, and especially about the future. So how can heritage today can help us to build a society for the future generations? That is something that is, of course, embodied in the term that we use, but here scholars want to propose something that would be more proactive in saying that heritage can actually change society more deeply in a way that we could live better all together if we take that also ideal. That would be one way to think about heritage today. And the other is more following the line that I've mentioned, and theorize, especially with a scholar that I really do appreciate, Caitlin De Silva, who think about curated decay. So proposing the idea that actually we should look also at objects, and here if we talk, for instance, about monuments, architecture, more broadly built environment, also for the way that progressively through times and with environment and human, natural and cultural factor, they are changing, and that we should not interfere within the process of their decay. So not intervening anymore on them and letting them go away. So also getting rid of this idea that things should be preserved in a very Western sense of the sense, namely that it should remain as it is, or saved, or protected from destruction. On the contrary, that destruction is an inherent part of any type of cultural object. We should accept it, and that would, and this is more philosophically speaking, also acknowledge our own disappearance, our own death, and we should also agree with that more broadly. So what does that do to ICOMOS, and how do I relate that to the way I think about an organization such as ICOMOS? I think the field of critical heritage studies, maybe as you have seen, is still extremely theoretical, and the way also we teach is about theory with big words, with keywords. But despite our will to engage in a dialogue with people who are doing heritage, this is the way I will say it, or interacting even physically with heritage, there is still not enough dialogue. It's not inexistent, but it's not there yet. And so I think this is really a place like ICOMOS in which this type of consistent dialogue, not punctual during a conference, but really integrating and having really a conversation that is consistent and that comes from both also places, could really be extremely fruitful for the future. The second point is absolutely not new, but I think it still needs, especially today, needs to be re-acknowledged, that the concept of heritage needs to be pluralized. We cannot still think about heritage the way that we do today, even if everyone has made an incredible effort to de-Westernize and decolonize the way we think about heritage. There is still a lot to do. And I think, for instance, the presentation, I'm here a bit biased, but for instance, by Lukács, who explained to us that some buildings were inscribed as heritage one day, 1 year after their construction, a few years after, or in completely different cultural context, or, and I have some example, even before they were completely built, etc. So there are really a lot of way to think about heritage, and a lot of work to do in pluralizing what it is and what it means for different communities. Same as the term preservation. So to think beyond the term preservation of conservation, and really critically assessing together what it does to things, to people, and more broadly, how does it serve us to still continue to conserve, preserve, and accumulate things in a world in which we are, on the contrary, invited to not do that anymore, also in our own personal life. More broadly, I think also our proposition to move toward, beyond conservation is to think also beyond that term, and to think, and then it relates also to Theodore's presentation, thinking about vulnerability of things, of building and thinking, not necessarily about conserving, but of caring, because at the end, this is what we are all doing together. And last but not least, not be afraid to engage with current issues, which are extremely political, but the world in which we're living requires us, I would say, to take positions on a lot of things. And taking heritage also in the perspective of building a world more equal and with social justice will be also, I would say, something that ICOMOS could have a voice and a role to play in. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to exchange.
Susan, is it all right if we move on with you?
Yes, I'm ready. If you would start my PowerPoint, please. Okay, well, thank you so much for the kind invitation to join you at this really interesting event, which is quite opportune for me. My own ISC, the 20th Century Heritage, just celebrated our 20th birthday and had our own seminar on looking at our achievements and challenges and emerging issues. And in my work at the Getty, we just spent the last year going through a similar process so that we could develop our response and roadmap for our work moving forward. And next slide, please. Like you did, can I get the next slide, please? There we go, thank you. So like you did, we started by looking at the shifts in practice over the last 25 years as context for our own work. And these shifts really, I think, reflect a democratization of heritage based on the idea that if heritage is a public good, then the public has a right to be involved in decisions about what's protected, how it's conserved, and this will result in better outcomes. And we noted the shifts that you've been talking about already today, shifts in our thinking from monuments to cultural heritage places, to thinking about cultural heritage in its broader natural context, from expert to community collaboration, and now to people-driven and people-centered approaches, from fabric-focused work to work that recognises the broader range of values that make a place significant, and a better understanding of the intangible attributes and better processes for how we conserve these values. This led, oh, can I have the next slide, please? This led my fellow departments and I to consider our role in the system given the current state of the field. And our observations are that the field of heritage conservation is undergoing fundamental change. It is a field in transition, and there's a need for conservation to be better aligned with larger societal imperatives and integrated into broader systems for addressing these. And the transition is really being driven by a number of factors, and some of these have already been mentioned today. The need to respond to the climate crisis, to better integrate sustainability in all its forms into our work. There's also a continuing reduction in government funding and resources for heritage that's affecting how our work is commissioned and implemented. And this is also resulting in shifting roles and responsibilities for conservation and a greater sharing across the public, the non-profit, the private and community sectors. Next slide, please. Calls for social justice, diversity and equity and inclusion also demand that our conservation is placed within broader contexts, and these choices about what's protected and conserved, who's involved, and how these decisions are being made are being challenged. In certain areas, we also observed a divergence between academic research and conservation practice at a time when greater overlap between the two is really what we need. We need research to be well targeted to more effectively support the necessary policy actions and provide practical solutions. And all these factors together are shifting the role of the professionals and the professional organisations in our field, the skill sets are needed, and the operational environment in which we're working. So how we respond to these challenges demand is really going to determine the future of our heritage and our success as champions in its conservation. Next slide, please. So just to mention a little bit about the Getty, for those of you that don't know us and our role in the heritage system, we're based in Los Angeles. We're a philanthropic cultural institution. We have 2 museums. We have a research institute, a grant-making body, and a conservation institute where I work. Next slide, please. Our mission at the Conservation Institute is to advance conservation practice internationally, and we always work with partners from the intergovernmental, government, professional, and non-profit sectors. Next slide, please. We undertake research, we do practical conservation work, we create and disseminate information and deliver training and capacity building. And a lot of our research really focuses ultimately on practical outcomes, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how to move research into practice. Our portfolio includes a number of areas that interface with ICOMOS, and these include our conservation principles and methods work. We've had a long-standing research on values, heritage values. It's very well aligned with the evolution of the work of ICOMOS. And this approach, the values-based approach, is at the core of our work, and it involves the development of processes and tools to engage and empower stewards and communities to care for heritage places, including consensus building and conflict resolution. And some of our most recent work is examining processes for community-led practices in Indigenous and marginalised communities. We do a lot of work with decorated surfaces and murals and wall paintings and mosaics and rock art. And we're currently partnering with the ICOMOS Mural Painting ISC to undertake a survey of the field on training and education in this sector. Our building materials work covers, stone, concrete, many traditional materials, and our work with earth is where we've worked with ICCROM for many years on a number of the Terra conferences. And recently, under the aegis of ICCROM, we hosted a colloquia to develop the roadmap for the field of earth and heritage conservation. Next slide, please. We have a long-term commitment to the conservation and management of archaeological sites. We've been involved in recording and documentation, particularly on inventory systems, and we've had a very close working relationship with SEPA during that time. Our urban conservation work has sought to advance the use of an operation of hull, and our Conserving Modern Architecture initiative has a fairly close working relationship with the ISC 20C. Next slide, please. So partnerships for us are at the core of all of our work, and I just show this slide as an example of one of our projects where you can see that ICOMOS ISC 20 is involved, and this is very typical of many of our projects, as I said. Next slide, please. So ICOMOS, as the lead professional heritage conservation organisation, looms very large in our work. We've supported ICOMOS over the years in various ways in recognition of its primacy in the field. ICOMOS's agenda and its work and its doctrinal texts and theoretical underpinnings also historically underpin our work. All my team members are members of national committees of ICOMOS. Many of us are directly involved in ISCs and working groups. Many of our staff trained at ICCROM, and we've partnered with ICCROM to deliver training where the theoretical and philosophical basis of the training shares its genesis with ICOMOS. So I would say that our work is well entwined with ICOMOS. ICOMOS is in and of our DNA. The philosophical basis of our work, I think, is traced back to the tenets that were laid out in the Venice Charter, and I'm not able to say how intentional that was. That's really a question for Giora, who knows more about this trajectory. However, I would say that our work from the 1990s on reflects and contributes to what I would describe as a sort of second wave in the theoretical development of ICOMOS doctrine. Our work at that time was really influenced by the evolution of the Venice Charter's theoretical underpinnings, heavily influenced by our work in the different contexts and contemporary practices of the time in the USA and places like Australia, where Indigenous and community values and engagement was influencing legislation and practice. So I would say that predates the sort of 2006 work that the Critical Heritage Organisation was doing. So our values research really aimed to advance the application of values-based approaches across the different contexts we were working in, and this became quite an important contribution to the field. Next slide, please. So this research led into our long-standing work with the Chinese government to support the development of their conservation system at the time, and that included the development of principles for conservation of heritage sites in China, which was published by ICOMOS China in 2000 and disseminated into their regional and national capacity building efforts. The Australian government actually partnered in this work, so unsurprisingly, the process developed and the ethos therein is influenced conceptually, obviously from its own context, but from both the Getty's values-based work and also the Australia ICOMOS Borough Charter. The idea that such a charter should be adapted to specific cultural contexts and periodically reviewed to respond to emerging and evolving societal issues has provided Australia, I think, with a really solid foundation. The Borough Charter has also been really useful by providing a very clear process, and this has been really incredibly useful and allowed it to be well integrated across policy and practice and legislation in that country, and I think it's been an interesting lesson for us in our work. So the ethos that characterized our work in China and the work that followed with other partners really involved this iterative exchange between policy level and on-the-ground work, testing, refining, and contextualizing according to specific cultural conditions, and considering how these approaches and methodologies may be useful in other contexts, and then thinking about how to scale that up for training purposes. So next slide, please. Our own journey from the Venice Charter continues, influenced by our experience and ongoing research. We continue to practice a values-based approach in our teaching and across our projects, contextualized to contexts and based on processes that we've developed. That means conservation aims to preserve really the values of a place as they've been identified. That's the kind of driving force behind it. I would say our own work has often really focused on this step of moving principles from implementation to practice, providing people on the ground with processes that can help them apply principles to guide the multitude of challenges and complexities they face in their work. And in our training, people tell us that is the most valuable thing they actually learn. So perhaps where we fit with the work of ICOMOS is really absorbing, championing, questioning its doctrinal work and working out how to operationalize and implement it in different contexts across our own projects and in our training and publications. Next slide, please. So we continue to partner with ICOMOS in different ways. Our recent work with the ISC20C to develop what we called the historic thematic framework was really aiming to facilitate thematic studies for 20th century heritage and thus encourage the study and the identification and protection of this heritage, which continues to be undervalued. And it really tries to prompt recognition for a broad range of heritage places and a broad range of values in alignment with ICOMOS's 20th century's own set of principles, the Madrid New Delhi document. So our relationship with this work was to support the ISC20, which was struggling to find the resources to undertake such an extensive professional piece of research. But this enabled us to work together to develop this really important tool that had been identified by the World Heritage Centre as a need. And this is an example of how we see working with ICOMOS and other organisations meets our mutual aims, leverages our network and our collective resources and our skills. Next slide, please. I hope that I've understood my brief properly for the panel here and that my musings might provide some opportunity for discussion. I'd just like to say that I think ICOMOS's substantial contribution to the international and national practice has obviously broadened and evolved in many areas of work over decades. And I think that we've been able to work adjacent to ICOMOS, absorbing, as I said, hopefully advancing and championing and further developing that work, that valuable work that ICOMOS does. As we all know, international conservation practice is a 20th century phenomena. I think the early aim of providing guiding principles and shared understanding of approaches across the global membership has stood us in good stead. It's what binds us together is this idea of a shared sense of values and an ability to observe and respect those of others where they differ. And that seems a pretty good basis for moving forward. Now we are faced with a multitude of threats to heritage conservation. ICOMOS's ability to move forward is really based on its strength as a community of practice and a forum where we can seek to understand and grow and evolve constructively together with other organisations that are out there dealing with the on-the-ground issues. I think being connected to local issues and stewards on the ground in practice is absolutely critical. Ultimately, how we as organisations remain relevant relies on local responses and the ability to work with these stewards of places that we care about. So evolving our theoretical practice globally is interesting and should continue, but doing that in ways that really responds to local needs that are constructive, practical and context specific seems absolutely key. Thank you. It's it from me.
Thank you very much, Susan. It's a little bit with a little delay, but thank you so much. We'll now give the floor to Valérie, if she managed to connect. I think she did.
Yes, I am here, Claudine. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much to Claudine and all the members of the scientific committee for the invitation to be with you today. I will be sharing some of the perspectives from the ICCROM, which is an intergovernmental organization that hopefully you all know. So next slide, please. So the first thing that I will mention is that the history and theory of conservation have always been at the core of ICCROM's activities, especially its training and capacity building activities from the very early courses that were organized at the center with very much the favor of the first Director General, Sir Harold Plenderleith, and followed by subsequent Director Generals and also by staff members. So next slide, please. Very influential was also the presence of Paul Philippot, who was himself, had made his final research on the theory and the proposals of Cesare Brandi, and he then transmitted most of those the concepts and the terminology and many of the principles and criteria that were established by Cesare Brandi. Next slide, please. And this idea that when was the moment of conservation and the whole philosophical understandings of conservation seen from a phenomenological point of view. So this permeated into the ICCROM courses and was then continued, next slide please, also with the teachings of Yuka Leto, who also finalized his PhD dissertation while he was already working at ICCROM, and which has become the seminal book that everybody knows on history of architectural conservation, which he managed to re-edit a couple of years ago with a revised version and important additions to this publication. And he continued also teaching history and theory of conservation and the different approaches over ICCROM courses for many years. Now, the role of ICOMOS, next slide, please, has been extremely important, of course, since the Venice Congress of 1964, which led to the creation of ICOMOS, but also with this founding document of the Venice Charter. Next slide, please. Which on which Claudine has done so much research, and I believe she has also been speaking about it earlier today, on the different signatories to the charter coming from different countries, and only 3 of them out of Europe. So while this was a seminal document, there's been a lot of research going about it, also on its impact and its relevance nowadays, with lots of criticism as well, as it was also mentioned earlier today. Next slide, please. But the impact of this document was immediate, with numerous translations being done in different countries. We found a very early adaptation, even before the charter was reorganized into Spanish, just from the proceedings of the meeting of Venice in 1964, done by the then director of the Conservation Center in Mexico City. And next slide, please. The relevance of ICOMOS, which was created a year later, as we all know, was the importance of creating these NGO that is composed of nowadays of more than 12,000 members. And this is what gives it its vitality, the fact that it's conservation professionals, as Susan mentioned, that are on the field and can actually relate to real life situations on the ground. It's also incredibly important that ICOMOS developed in addition to the national committees, the international scientific committees, which have created so much of the thinking on the theories and impacted the history of our profession. Next slide, please. And the relevance of ICOMOS started growing from very early on, with the slow creation of charters, and eventually many more over the following years. Now, in 1972, when UNESCO created and ratified the World Heritage Convention for the protection of cultural and natural heritage, ICOMOS and ICCROM, together with IUCA, have been playing a vital role as advisory bodies to this convention. And this convention actually has shaped the way many of the principles and the criteria for heritage conservation are now understood, and has allowed also the development of important perspectives, broadening our understanding of what heritage is and how it should actually be assessed and protected and preserved for the present and for the future. Next slide, please. The main elements of the convention center around the concept of outstanding universal value, which is defined by specific criteria, which have also evolved over time, and the way we understand them was shaped through the thinking of organizations like ICCROM and ICOMOS, the evolution of the notion of authenticity, as well as integrity for cultural sites, and also the evolution of management and protection, which, as Susan has mentioned, shifted from focusing on monuments to really better understanding of sites in a much bigger perspective. It has also been about the way more actors are involved in effectively protecting these sites. Next slide, please. Now, another important document where both ICOMOS and ICCROM were present, as well as as UNESCO World Heritage Center, was the Danner Document of Authenticity, together with other heritage agencies at national level, including Japan, but also Norway. Led to this recognition of cultural diversity and the plurality of values, of which Susan was also speaking earlier, And this led to an important revision in the following years of the NARA meeting to better understand how the concepts and the theory should actually be much more grounded on what different people and different stakeholders saw as heritage and how it should actually be preserved. Next slide, please. Now, from the ICCROM perspective, well, all these evolutions since the Venice Charter all the way to the early days of the World Heritage Convention, we're seeing also the development of different government agencies that were dealing with heritage conservation. And there was a specialization which actually was very positive and led to much research on materials, on focusing on different aspects of conservation, but it also led to compartmentalization, which has been heavily criticized and also seen as this authorized heritage discourse, which was mentioned earlier. These led to a division between tangible and intangible heritage, movable and immovable heritage, and also nature and culture. And next slide, please. It really took a lot of effort to, and some bad experiences at some heritage sites, to focus back on what sometimes has been seen as ages-long traditions into how we should be seeing heritage. And for indigenous peoples, for example, there's no distinction between nature and culture. There's no distinction between tangible and intangible. And humans are part of the natural world. We're not above the natural world. And humans, animals, forests, water bodies are, and even spirits are part of a system or network with reciprocal obligations. So next, please. If we look back also to the more cultural perspective, not just necessarily the indigenous groups perspective, but also how heritage was seen in the early days. I usually find this quote from Quatremer de Quincy in 1796 when he was writing to one of Napoleon's generals on the movement of objects away from Rome that were going to be brought back to France, where he was saying that he was speaking about museum, and museum was not necessarily a closed building as we consider it nowadays. It was considered as what we would see heritage nowadays, but he was saying the Museum of Rome is composed of art objects, but also of the places, the sites, the mountains, the quarries, the old roads, the positions of the ruined cities, geographical relationships, and the relationships of all those objects among them, the memories, the local traditions, and the uses that are still existing, and whatever parallels or that can be made that can only happen in that specific place. So this was in the late 18th century, and it's something that we're now going back to. Next slide, please. ICOMS programs in trying to reckon with what was happening after the meeting in Nara and all the understanding of broadening perspectives, and also the understanding that of the inclusion of cultural landscapes into the World Heritage System. ICCROM launched a series of programs, one of which was the Integrated Territorial Urban Conservation Program, led from 1995 to 2005, which integrated urban conservation into greater territorial planning and focusing on sustainable development. And this program was led by Yuka Yopileto and then continued by Herb Stovall, both of whom had incredible influence on the understanding of cultural heritage and how we protect it. In the subsequent years, ICCROM also developed the Living Heritage Program from 2003 to 2010, promoting the concept of continuity among communities, and integrating people-centered approaches, of which Susan was referring to. The importance of considering different perspectives in the care and protection of cultural heritage. And later came the people-centered approaches courses from 2015 and 16, which led to the people, nature, culture courses. And next slide, please. Our current World Heritage Leadership Program, of which I will speak in one moment. And essentially behind all these was an understanding that there are many more values that have to be considered when assessing the significance of a heritage site or place, and the fact that these values will not be able to be balanced, but it has to be about understanding the principles that guide our decisions and making informed decisions about where we want to take conservation. Next slide, please. So the World Heritage Leadership Program, which is led in combination by ICCROM, IUCN, and Norway, in close collaboration with the World Heritage Center and ICOMOS, promotes a heritage place approach where it's not just the monument itself for the place that was designated as World Heritage that needs to be considered, but that it needs to be include much broader perspectives and a much broader setting, so that the relationships between all those surrounding areas and the influence they might have on the heritage place can actually be considered when taking decisions about its conservation and planning, and also when deciding the theoretical frameworks that should be defining what it is that we are going to be doing with those sites. Next slide, please. So another avenue that ICCROM has been taking is also the dissemination of history and the theory and different theories of conservation by republishing important texts that have been produced in the past, and trying to provide a translation into different languages, particularly into Spanish and English of those or central texts, and by inviting guest authors to also contribute their perspectives on what has been the impact of those authors or those texts in our current world. And the importance is to try to keep an active view on the past, because I mean we are standing on the shoulders of giants, and the past is equally important for us to be able to get inspiration and also understand where we're coming from for better protection of heritage in the future. Next slide, please. And in terms of the challenges, I mean, Susan already mentioned many of them, but it has been about loss of diversity and loss of heritage that we are seeing at incredible rates and speed in recent years. We're also witnessing losses of traditional knowledge in different parts of the world. There are pressures on resources and incredible pressures caused by development projects. We are more people on the earth and we need more resources than ever. So how are we going to reconcile those development projects with the conservation of heritage, in the understanding that many of the places that we are trying to protect are also living sites? So it's not always about opposing heritage and development, but it's about finding sustainable solutions for the future. And we also need to revise the relation of humans with their environment in a much less hierarchical way, not seen as a Cartesian way of humans imposing their view on other species or on the planet, but also trying to find alternatives that actually allow us to keep our diversity of heritage in all its forms. Next slide, please. So in view of the incredible challenges of climate change and armed conflict and that compartmentalization that I was speaking earlier about, I think it's very important that we try to find ways where we can integrate more actors into the protection of cultural heritage and find those sustainable solutions, and that this should be reflected also in our theory or theories for heritage conservation. And with that, I will close. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. We will hear now the last of the four presentation by Alexandra. Alexandra, are you there? Do you hear me?
Can you hear me?
We hear you. But
Wonderful.
I don't think I got a presentation from you.
No
So-
slides.
So
You're going to have to look at me for the next,
no
I think,
problem.
7
That's
minutes.
perfect. No, that's perfect. Perfect.
I'm very conscious that I am the last speaker in what has been an incredibly interesting but dense conversation today. And I'm very keen not to repeat too much of what's already been brilliantly presented here by my colleagues. I was going to do a very brief introduction of what Historic England is. So I'm head of international at Historic England, which is an arm's length body of the UK government, founded in 1983 by Act of Parliament. So we are actually a statutory part of the English planning system, and we provide advice on planning related matters relating to all designated historic places in England. So that's about 500,000 listed buildings, 20,000 scheduled monuments, so archaeological sites, as well as parks and gardens, historic wrecks, and battlefields. In addition, there are around 10,000 conservation areas in England who are directly managed by local authorities. We're also the technical focal point for the UK for the World Heritage Convention and the Hague Convention, and that's in relation to the World Heritage Convention in relation to the 35 World Heritage sites across the UK, including the overseas territories. So we provide advice in many directions, both to government, but also to individuals, including local authorities and developers. In parallel, we're also an independent research organisation. So we undertake academic research, we co-sponsor PhDs and so on in the field. Thought it would be worth making the point that our strapline, so the way that we have shortened our purpose, is that we're the public body that helps people care for, enjoy, and celebrate England's spectacular historic environment. And the reason I wanted to go back to that point is that fundamentally, all of these documents, it doesn't matter if you're looking at the World Heritage Convention, the Venice Charter, the operational guidelines, individual parts of conservation philosophy and theory, fundamentally, all of that is a recognition that people care about old stuff. Now, whether that's archaeology, whether that's a historic building, what we do know is that people fundamentally care about it. I think it's also worth remembering that a lot of the main instruments that exist internationally and nationally, actually, in the UK, really had their origins in that post-World War II period. So it was after a period of loss or about to be loss, where at the national and international level, people recognized that there were certain places, there were certain monuments, there were certain sites that were so important that they needed to be protected at all costs. And that really was the driving force behind the creation of UNESCO as a whole, behind the Venice Charter, the World Heritage Convention, the Hague Convention. All of these documents were created because there was a desire to recognize how important these places were to people. And the reason that I'm saying this so much is that I think we've got to the point where we have all of these documents that were essentially documents of hope. They were documents that outlined an aspirational place. So this is what we wanted to achieve and what we still want to achieve. But over the years, we have got to a place where these documents, these principles, have somehow put heritage conservation sometimes in opposition to the concept of growth and development. And I think that really is at the heart of what needs to be discussed and considered, is how to bring what is essentially a crucial human factor, which is ensuring that we can continue to live in and love these places. How can we ensure that we can do that, but while still conserving the core parts of the significance or the values of these places that we in a more academic space have been able to recognize? And I think that remains the area where there's the most tension, certainly at the international level, between heritage conservation and what we are facing today. I'm deliberately keeping it short so that hopefully we can have more of a conversation in our roundtable. But Giora, I don't know how you wanted to do this part.
Okay, and here we have a roundtable, as you can see. Well, I believe it was very interesting, and we probably have questions and reactions and so on. We have less than half an hour to ask questions or comments and so on. I would like to start with one. The 4 participants in the roundtable discussion. I assume, although it's a question, that through your work and involvement in conservation, you see evolution and changes in the thinking or in conservation itself, in the practice, in the needs. If we were asking you to take several doctrinal papers of ICOMOS, or let's be more specific, Venice Charter, review it now through your eyes, in your capacity, in your projects. Would you do it? And do you think that, let's say, Venice Charter is fully relevant, partly relevant, should be replaced? Thank you. Who wants to answer?
I can take a try if you like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, in my practice, I'm Australian, so I come from a different place. So I've never used the Borough Charter directly because I'm a child of the Borough Charter, which is a sort of second wave interpretation of that was contextualized and revised over many periods to address the evolution. So I've always thought of the Venice Charter with great admiration, respect, and obviously it provides a basis for practice in many places. But for me, I think of it as really, really important and fundamental, but it's a historic document. But I did go back and read it again before this forum, because I think that many of the things in there are really quite legitimate still. It's a matter of interpretation in some respects. If you take it very literally, you can read it one way. If you think about it more as principles and as a starting point for discussion, and again, as Alexandra was saying, you know, as a kind of contextualize it, you know, I think it wasn't, I don't believe, ever meant to be a set of rigid rules. So I think it can still be used as a starting point, as a reference point. But, you know, I have found the way that doctrine, you know, in my own country and how we've thought about it at the Getty and evolved our thinking on values-based approaches, which is really implicit within it, have been more helpful to recognize things, as I said, you know, we are conserving values, not you know, fabric or one thing or another. We look to the values of a place and we seek to understand them and then work out how is best to conserve them. So something like the Borough Charter, which identifies social significance as really important and suggests and requires that you engage the people that hold those that are able to interpret and understand and share those values, is really important. So I think it still has relevance as a really important historic document as a basis for our work. But I've never really understood the need to slavishly and literally interpret it in the way that I think you might be asking the question. I can't tell.
Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Valérie and Alexandra.
yeah,
Yes,
I think Alexandra was first.
No, I was just going to say that I couldn't agree more, Susan. I think going back, I was really struck by that image. I think it was Nigel who showed this morning of the brick. The brick that had become eroded because of the intervention, the contemporary intervention of the cement mortar instead of lime mortar. So now the brick became sacrificial to the mortar. And the parallel that was then drawn between heritage being the brick and then the conservation philosophy, which perhaps is too hard, which actually in and of itself erodes the heritage that it's setting out to protect. And I think that there are times where you can see that. I'm thinking particularly in the World Heritage space, where I think conservation philosophy is applied in a much tighter way, let's say, than it is across heritage at national levels. So I think it's in the World Heritage space where the kind of international standards of conservation philosophy are still applied in that very kind of harsh way. And what we're beginning to see and what we're seeing across the world actually are the inadvertent negative impacts of an overly conservation approach. So where people are no longer able to live in those places because they're no longer their places, or they've been priced out. So now it's become a tourist place. They don't want to live there. They don't have their shops. They don't have it's all become about the tourist economy, or it's become about, and I think that's where the conservation philosophy, so yes, it needs to be there as an aspirational space, something that we all aspire to, and that's the ideal. But there is also the reality of actually trying to keep these places in use and keep them in use by the local communities that kind of that they're at the heart of. And I think that's the biggest challenge which we face on a day-to-day level with our national heritage sites, but that actually we're not really addressing as much at the international level yet.
Valérie?
Thank you very much. Well, I also agree that the Venice Charter is a historic document that played a really important role in its own day. But of course, there are many elements to it that would need to, I mean, the terminology, some of the concepts have evolved, and there's different perspectives. So I would not touch the Venice Charter. I would leave it as a really historical moment, I mean, which was the decision made by ICOMOS many years ago. But definitely, I do believe that there needs to be a reference point at of some sort where we can actually find common ground that would be applicable to different societies, to different cultures, to different places, because we do need that common reference to establish limits to what it is that we want, how and why do we want to keep certain things for ourselves, as testimonies of different periods of time of different practices in different parts of the world. But then the local application is what will change probably. So there can be universal principles, let's say, and then local criteria that may adapt to different contexts. And in context is what will define that interpretation that Susan was referring to. And so having those two elements will be really important. And I think we're also we're at the moment where we have to probably find new avenues for certain situations where what would have been advocated for as good conservation can no longer be done for a number of reasons. So one very concrete example would be coastal areas in the tropical world that were using coral stone and coral stone based lime mortars. The coral stone can no longer be used because it is protected. This is what is providing oxygen to our entire world. And that original material that would have been the best possible material to do conservation work, maintenance work of places where, as Alexandra was saying, places that are living sites. I mean, how do you tell a person that lives in a house that they can no longer apply plaster of a certain type because it's no longer available, or because if you live in a small island somewhere in the tropical area and that local lime is no longer available, what are the alternatives? So we have to find new solutions and we will have to adapt. So creating those two sorts of reference documents, I guess, would be useful. It doesn't mean that by not accepting an established discourse, we need to live in an anarchy and that everything is possible. We still need, I think, some references that can be universal and locally developed solutions.
Yeah, and yeah.
Can I just add really quickly? I don't know if you can hear me. Can I just add really quickly that I think one of the other things is that the Venice Charter was written 60 years ago, and 60 years ago actually conservation thinking was not something that was that common actually. So the idea of conservation really was held in a much smaller forum. So a smaller number of people were really thinking about conservation philosophy and conservation practice. I think in the intervening 60 years at national level, there's been a huge amount of thinking in universities, in institutes, across, but also practical implementation of those principles at the national level. So testing out how to make these principles work in practice. And I think that actually, as you say, I wouldn't touch the Venice Charter, but actually drawing on that experience, drawing on the 60 years of, kind of conservation thinking across the globe, and ensuring that it has a universal application, because as we know, and even Claudine's maps were demonstrating that there was quite a Eurocentric approach to the thinking on conservation. So ensuring that it has a much more universal approach, or is it regional, or I mean, question, I think is something which would be really useful.
Can you? Okay, good. So I just said the decision was, and I think that's still valid. My question was a little bit, in a way, theoretical. You do not change historic documents because situation changed. You can create new ones. You can create additions and so on. Or you can say that I don't agree with this document at all, and we have our own. And maybe that's your case, Julie.
No, I think, and I won't repeat what has been said, because indeed it's more than, a historical document, but also an incredible source for us today to analyze the way that heritage has been conceptualized through time at a precise moment in history, which of course we are absolutely not anymore. Also, if we consider the type of people, their nationalities, their gender of people who were actually involved in writing and thinking along this chart. So actually, what I was about to say is indeed that as an historical document, I think it obviously embodies what has been criticized heavily afterwards in terms of the wording that is used, the fact that it does not apply to a large number of communities. So to be relevant today, it would need to be rewritten indeed, especially I'm not only thinking about its application, as we said, etc., but also the words that are used, not necessarily the different languages, but the way heritage is thought about is quite problematic. So I would have examples, but I think, and also maybe to move to a broader, or to open the conversation, is this tension between the need to have a document, to have references, to also keep producing them. We've seen on the different presentation, different type of bodies, of scholars, of professionals are producing more and more knowledge. But at the same time, in order to be relevant today, we need to acknowledge that it can never, ever be universal, and not pretend to be so. I think that's the main issue. We can say that we need to have document, of course, as a basis that can be interpreted, that can be changed depending on the context. But I would say the major issue is really that when we pretend and we make it as if it could ever be applied to everyone and be inclusive in all contexts. That could never happen. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for selecting me, Julie, because I'm going to ask a question about your thoughts. Actually, it's not a question for you. It is a question for 3 online participants. Critical heritage studies in nature criticize the existence of your institutions, actually. And I really believe that critiques are necessary for progress. So I appreciate the studies of critical heritage studies, or your organization. And I wonder what ICOMOS or ICOMOS or Getty Institute or English Heritage England thinks about the works carried by critical heritage studies. Are you referring to their criticize during your studies? What do you think about their thoughts, and do you take them as a reference in the progress of your institutions? Thank you.
I think answering this question will take a whole session, and therefore I suggest we keep the question, and you keep it, and we'll find an opportunity. And if we have two more.
Okay.
But thank you. Just a short intervention. I did like very much the discussion on the Charter of Venice as a historical document. So that means, of course, that we as conservationists, we have to conserve. We have, if necessary, to restore the document and adding eventually things. What actually also happened, I think there are charters on landscapes, on historical gardens, on vernacular architecture, on modern architecture, etc., etc. But I have also the impression, sorry if my evaluation is not precise enough, that most of the actual revisions, at least documents who were really seen as revisions, have been successful or essential. I think, to me, one of the most interesting revisions, being also, adding things, has been the Declaration of San Antonio, 1996. And we always, in all discussions, we forget that document. And it's such a rich document, and probably, on the other hand, I think you never should let's say, change, I'm very conservative, the 10 commandments, or I mean the 24 articles of the Charter of Venice. But I think it's, yeah, it's a very interesting issue. Yeah.
Add it to the file about curating decay and how I can see it happening, but I can see my fears the way that who's the curator, who manages the decay, and it's the same as who manages conservation. So it's duplicating our own problem.
Okay, so I have the strengths of the physical body, so I will enjoy the mic. No, I think you are touching upon exactly the issue, and also because I would say more broadly, we are not ready for this idea of decay. Just I've been a very small anecdote in this conference last week, in which everyone was theoretically speaking about indeed all this powerful theory that works on paper, that is really stimulating intellectually, and this is what we teach to our students, etc. But at some point, someone showed a building being destroyed in specific political context in Japan, and having seen the whole history, the whole room did these emotional reactions, and so actually everything fell apart in a second, because actually as also humans, we have an emotional engagement with heritage that does not actually in the present, or actually nowadays, allow us to think about destruction as part of conservation, as part of the life of heritage. So theoretically, it's very stimulating, and it's very postmodern, and it uses a lot of that type of theory. But in practice, we do not yet live in a world in which consciously and voluntarily we are ready to see that happening. Plus the question that you just asked is who is deciding to let go, for whom? So you have always this question of power, but actually this is the center of critical heritage studies, which we could always put away the critical, because now everyone who is a bit in the field of theory, heritage studies, is doing critical heritage studies, or critics of critical heritage studies. Anyways, all that to say that we are all extremely stimulated by this idea, but I'm not sure that it does align with the reality as well. So this is where we need a space to discuss that creatively as well.
Okay, we should really finish. We have a few minutes, but I see that Susan still wants. You want the floor, Susan?
Yes, I just had two comments, if I may. On the question of curated decay, I think there's a practical aspect to it. Actually managing decaying buildings is very expensive. There are a lot of health and safety challenges, and you have lost revenue from the land. So it's not that we're not ready philosophically to think about it. We have archaeological sites which we are actually curating decay on essentially when we manage them. So it's not a new idea that we're having to deal with places that are not in use and have, been let use. And it's a different degree, I acknowledge. But there are some very challenging problems associated with curating decay, which make it physically, financially, and practically problematic. And I know we've been thinking a lot about this with some places from modern heritage that make it really difficult, because you've got to lock them up so nobody can go near them, so they don't fall over and kill people. So that's a kind of one thing. I just wanted to go back to Julie's point about this, like ideas of having, more doctrinal texts and things, and just reflect on my own role at the ISC20C as its president. When we started our work, there was a big question about whether we should do a charter for dealing with modern heritage. There are 1 million charters out there. Do we need another one? I personally wasn't hugely in favor of it, because I was keen that this heritage got absorbed into the continuity of practice and wasn't called out as different and needed its own charter. But I have to admit I'm being proved wrong, because in the absence of legislative frameworks in some countries and recognition, it's proved, the Madrid New Delhi document that we developed has proved to be very, very valuable. We've had to revise it 3 times, because when we started it, people just wanted it to be about architecture rather than the gamut of 20th century places that should be recognized. And there were other issues like social significance, which our committee wasn't ready to go there on. So that document has actually proven to be very, very helpful, and it's now been translated into 20 plus languages, and people who are using it in countries where they haven't got good legislative support to do so have found it very interesting. So that goes to the point that having sets of principles that may be universal but can be interpreted to local context, because I think that's what we're talking about here, not kind of rigid principles, is important. And I think that in my experience, all conservation practitioners and people are critical of their work and think about it critically. It's not that we need to be sort of, we don't think about all of these different things as we do our work. So that's my kind of, sorry, I'll be quiet now. I just wanted to respond to some of the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. I'm afraid we come to the end of the meeting. Well, I see that Alexandra had asked to say something. Will you like to say something very briefly, Alexandra? Because we have another meeting.
That's fine. It's very, very brief. It's just on the point of managed loss and what I guess we're calling adaptive release. I think all of the climate change research, the adaptation mitigation measures, all of that is pulling in a lot of the thinking on adaptive release, and that's stuff that we've been thinking about at Historic England for decades now, and so there's a lot of material there and research that has been integrated. A lot of it is packaged in with hazard mapping, with disaster planning, and so and I think it's about where does that thinking sit in a lot of places. That was my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to add something, Julie, as you're here with us? Okay, so thank you, everyone. And what I would like to say is that I think that this roundtable and this session, which was much too short, shows that it would be so interesting for a committee to engage on a more regular basis with other actors of heritage on the international scene. So I think this could be something we should think about. So thank you very much to the 4 of you who have accepted the challenge to come and share our thoughts with us. We will now close the session for today, the conference for today. And of course, you're invited to join us tomorrow for the rest of the conference at 9 o'clock.